Hello everybody and welcome back to another Kings of War tournament report. I'm Visibly Riley, and today we're going to talk about Game 3 of the Tacoma Masters event, which saw my Ogres facing off against some Varangur. So I was a little worried going into this game because, you know, sitting on a low draw but a very high win, and I'm playing against someone that I've played for a number of years at this point. In fact, I've been playing him games since I've been playing any mass battle fantasy game anyway. So, and I know that his list is both a tough one and one that he's been practicing a lot more than I've been practicing mine. So anyway, before I go into what the scenario was, I thought I'd talk about the terrain. So starting in the lower right hand corner, we have a height 2 hill on my side. And then to the left of that, we have a height 4 building. To the left of that, we have a height flat water feature. Above that, we have a height 6 wood right there. To the right of that forest, we have a height 1 obstacle attached to a height 4 impassable piece. Below that, we have another height 1 obstacle attached to a height 6 forest. And then we have a height 2 hill, or second one here. And then finally off to the right here, a height flat water feature. So not a particularly challenging board for the ogres here. I actually put that forest in the middle of the table because my opponent has a lot more shooting than I do, and I have a lot more pathfinder than him. So I thought it might be a good idea. But anyway, the scenario ended up being push this time around. So what, generally speaking, you get D3 loot tokens in push, but when you're playing the blackjack version, you just always get the maximum. So you always have 3 loot tokens. And in case you didn't know, loot tokens make it so you are maximum speed 5, you cannot be surged or wind blasted, and then you can't fly and you lose nimble. So both of us, you know, and generally speaking, you just take your loot tokens and put them on the toughest unit you have, or the toughest units if you're something like dwarves, right? In the case of my opponent's list and my list, we both only had the one unit that was really capable of holding these loot tokens without, you know, any ill effects. So for you know, I'll point that out when it comes up, but we just put all 3 tokens on 1 unit each, so there's no spreading out. Now, let's talk about what my opponent's list is, and this time, at least, I did take a picture of his entire army, if not mine. So, starting on the left here, we have a chieftain on Direfang, I want to say. It's whatever the large cab that they can ride. Then we have a cavern dweller, that is that rhino. And then next to the cavern dweller, we have a horde of fallen, pretty ubiquitous in Varangur lists. We have a horde of Bloodsworn with the Brew of Sharpness. To the right of that, we have MacLeod, then a second, Cavern Dweller. Off to the right here, we have a King on Chimera, or a Chieftain on Chimera, and I think it has the Fury upgrade, but I know it has the Mace of Crushing. Then to the right of that, we have 1, 2, 3 identical regiments of, I think they're called Horse Raiders, which are the nimble cav in Varangur they generally have thrown weapons. My opponent has opted for the bow upgrade on all of them, and I think that's definitely the smart thing to do. Other than that, there might be a few magic items that I'm missing here, but that's the army. And yeah, I'm definitely a fan of it, even though it is an elite list, meaning I think it has the same problem that a lot of elite armies have, which is, especially if they're combat oriented, which is once you get into the fight, if you double one, it's, you know, it's very bad. It's much worse. All right, not even double one, but like flub a roll, right? You can just lose the game, or if you misplace, you know, you slightly place off. Anyway, so I think it's a strong list, but one that I think I can beat, although I was worried about it as he has me outranged here. So let's go through the ogre army again for deployment. So starting on the right, we have my first regiment of chariots, and then to the left of that, we have my warlord on chariot with the banner of the griffin. Then we have the second regiment of chariots. Then right next to this wall, we have the horde of siege breakers with the pathfinder. Behind them, we have my Warlock with the Inspiring Talisman and Aura of Heroism. Behind that Warlock, oh, and actually I forgot to mention, so behind that Warlock is the Red Goblin Scouts, the first regiment of the, or first troop of that. So all of my loot tokens are on my Siege Breakers, as they don't slow down, nothing matters. And then all of my opponent's loot tokens are on his Bloodsworn. So that's where they are. To go back to the Ogres, we, on the left here, have my Horde of Hunters with Brew of Strength. Behind them, my ASB with the Sword of Slashing. And behind them, the second troop of Red Goblin Scouts. Now, as is my way, the whole left side of the table I didn't get a picture of, so you'll just have to believe me what's over there. So it is the Boomer Horde. The first Boomer Horde is right about there. The second Boomer Horde is right about there. I have 2 Boomer Sergeants. I think one is in the front, and then an ASB there, and then another Boomer Sergeant. So yeah, all of my guns just go to the left, which was intentional. If I face off against these, horse raiders with my boomers, he just wins that fight, as I will be chasing, getting some blast off, while he can just back off with bows. So I think that's the correct counter deployment. And moving on to turn 1. So turn 1, the Varangur win the roll off and advance forward. Not quite on the right here, or on my right flank. My opponent just moves forward to keep out of 16 of my chariots, which is a prudent move. And also making sure that all 3 of these regiments can shoot at least this chariot regiment and make sure that I don't have cover. So that's the plan there. In the middle, his first Cavern Dweller and MacLeod just sort of advanced towards the forest, and I'm not sure whether this Cavern Dweller couldn't walk into the forest, because it doesn't have Pathfinder, I don't think. I know it has Strider, but whether he couldn't or just didn't want to. But I think if he could, I probably would have towed into this forest just to give me line of sight and zone out some of these units, because I'm not going to be able to charge him yet, right? I mean, the goblins could, right? Like, they're deadly, but other than that, I don't know if I could really do it. And even if the goblins did it, it'd be a hindered charge. So I don't know about that. In the back here, though, his Bloodsworn just decided to not really move forward at all. I think that is a wise move, as I'll talk about on the left here. His Fallen have moved around the forest here, and with the Fallen right here facing like this, or having their line of sight like this, and then on the right he has his King on Chimera facing this direction. He has zoned out the 2 big areas of open terrain from my army being able to utilize it, right? Since he's so much faster than I am, I mean, all my speed's on the right, so these are all my speed 8 units, and then on the left I'm maxing out, well, besides the goblins, I'm maxing out at speed 6, while the Fallen are a nimble 8. So I think this is a wise move to keep the Bloodsworn back, because there's no reason to really rush it right now. They don't really need to lend their combat strength, especially as we have a very similar number of drops, right? Very similar number in terms of combat able units. So he's not going to get chaffed up. He's going to be fighting something real if he needs to fight, and I think it's a good idea. And then finally, off here on the left, you can see that the Cavern Dweller is not quite in this forest either, and the Dire Fang also does not enter the forest. On this side, that's a pretty good idea, because I have all my boomers, right? So, there's no reason to just give me shots at the beginning of the game, even if he does have cover. So, moving forward, so he fires all these bows into my chariots. I think he rolls a little below average, as I think those guys have like 16 shots on 5s. So 16 shots on 5s and 5s ends up doing 6 wounds to me, but does get that waiver, so my opponent rolls a 10 plus, which is unfortunate for me, but I guess it doesn't matter that much, as I'm not gonna really advance with these chariots at all just yet, as this King on Chimera, this Chieftain on Chimera, is doing a great job of zoning me out right now. So I guess if it has to happen, it should happen now in terms of that waiver. And here is Ogre turn 1. So yeah, mostly the Ogres just do what they do and advance forward, although I am a little bit more trepidatious right now. So this pink die is marking off how far the King and Chimera can charge, and my army stays out of that charge. So I move the chariots forward this regiment. He could charge me with these wolves and maybe these ones as well. I know my right, these wolves can definitely make it, but they probably can't actually handle chariots in one go, as I am a 16-18 due to the rally 2 of my warlord. And then if he does bounce, I will have a flank charge with my warlord at least, and maybe a flank charge with these guys, and then the counter charge, and I can just start deleting these ranged units without really trying. So as long as I stay out of that Chimera's range, I think is a good thing. Otherwise, my warlord stays back a little bit. I don't want him to get charged. I think he's really important for this right side as a linchpin, so instead I just stay out of 16 of all these units, because I believe they're all speed 8. But yeah, staying out of range, while these chariots just back up slightly to get out of range as well. I think his chieftain can still charge the chariots, but I'm not super worried about that. No, he definitely can't. I must have backed out because I'm terrified of that thinking about it. That or I made a big mistake. But anyway, in the middle you can see that my siege breakers have just run forward. They are towing the wood. The idea here is that I'm out of the line of sight of the King on Chimera, and I'm in line of sight of this, what is it called? The Cavern Dweller is in my front. So even though the Cavern Dweller has crushing 3 and hits on a 3+, it's still only, I think, 6 plus d6 attacks, and it only wounds me on a 3 because of that big shield on the siege breakers, and they will mess up a Cavern Dweller on that counter charge, along with, I've got all these the hunters and the ASB back here to lend support if I need it. So yeah, the idea is that I'm going to try to zone these dogs back a little bit to free up my chariots and make it so this king or this chieftain on Chimera has to do something about the siege breakers, especially as I have all the loot tokens. Lastly, I really want the siege breakers to get into the wood, because my plan with these loot tokens isn't to have the siege breakers hold it the entire game. I want him to waste all of since all of his shooting has no piercing, I want him to waste all of it on my def 6 unit. Although he could get around to the flanks to be wounding me on 4s, but yeah, I want as much as possible to go into these guys. While I think he can kill it, I think it'll take him too many turns, and that'll leave me with resources later. So that's the plan. As for the other stuff in the middle, my hunters just sort of take up location. It's not great because this obstacle is really messing me up. I think I'm the one that placed it there too, so just a bit mistake by me. I actually didn't know that you could just place the obstacle, I think it was like more than 5 inches away from terrain. I thought you had to put it in contact with the piece, so doesn't really matter. But yeah, so they're just sort of staring at an obstacle, although they are zoning these guys a little bit. The Fallen don't quite have a 16-inch charge, so yeah, that's the plan there. My goblins just turn to face, they're facing the board. They do what goblins do, so they can just get in the way. I thought about scooting these goblins over here to the right to zone out his ranged units a bit more, but I think I'll actually need them to absorb a charge, at least one charge, as these 3, or these 4, I guess, MacLeod is also no slouch in combat. These 4 units are very strong in combat, and due to the Varangur having slightly higher than average nerve, I probably am not going to be able to one-round any of these things, so that's the plan. Lastly, off to the left, you can't see it, but trust me, those boomers are there. The boomers all just run forward, since there's no threat to them right now, as nothing can see them through that forest. They're just getting the best positioning they can, and that's about it. As for excuse me, as for the shooting, the only thing I get off is right here. My warlock cast onto my ASB or of heroism, only getting 1 success, but still that gives rally 1 to all these units. And I think this is well, I guess it's not as relevant now that the chariot formation is essentially dead and Aura of Heroism is down a die. But Aura of Heroism, having a target for it, was a really important thing that I've learned about this list, where having an ASB hang around with the Warlock is great because they're nimble, they have a small frontage so they can go a lot of places, and it's not that important that they need to be positioned like to really be threatening people a lot. So they can just be facing towards nothing to get them into a better spot to have rally. And yeah, so anyway, it's just a small thing. If you could cast it on yourself, that wouldn't be a problem, but you can't. So anyway, moving forward to turn 2. So turn 2 for the Varangur. This is actually after his turn has ended, but there aren't that, it's a tournament, so there aren't too many pictures. I think that his Fallen, they either didn't move or they just moved slightly forward to get my hunters into range. Off on the left, he's decided to anchor the... Oh, no, I think the Fallen have touched the trees a little bit here. And he's decided to anchor the Direfang, or the Chieftain on Direfang, and the other... what is it called, Cavern Lurker, into the forest just to threaten my boomers a bit more. And I think that's the correct time, or this is the correct time to do it. Seems like a smart plan. As for the other Cavern Lurker in the middle here, it basically, so it was right about here at the beginning. It just about faces and runs off. Since the Siege Breakers are only speed 5, regardless of how many loot tokens they have, he can just get slightly out of 10 inches and be safe. And then also out of 12 inches from these hunters, and it's a pretty good move. Preserves that Cavern Dweller, even though it'll take him a full turn of positioning to get anything, get any worth out of it for the next go. But saving a Cavern Dweller till turn 4, it's still pretty good. As for the right, you can see the King on Chimera backs up a little bit, just a little wary of chariot danger along with siege breakers. So, not gonna fall for, or not going to go, I bet I can take a siege breaker charge, because those are famous last words. So yeah, it does that. I think these dogs are slightly out of 10 as well. We'll see about that, but yeah, I think they're out of 10 there. And speaking of the dogs, all these wolf raiders just shoot into my chariots again. They only do 4 wounds this time, but my opponent's on that waver train and rolls a 6+ and nails it. So these chariots are just perma-wavered, it looks like, which is, it's not that big of a deal, I guess. As long as they're not dead, it's great. And here we see Ogre turn 2. Ogre turn 2 is a bit more impactful. I'm actually going to roll a picture back for a second here. So, as you can see, these dogs are behind, they're behind Ogre units, but specifically the dogs on my right here, they have just the thinnest line towards these dogs here, who are also definitely within that 20-inch charge range. So, the idea is, how do I do this charge without going through the forest? Because I need to do 1 wound to these dogs to turn off their guns and make it so they have to fight me, because then I can really bring my siege breakers around and I can, really start threatening this side that I have not formulated a plan to deal with yet. So yeah, I have a plan for that. And then I have these dogs here. And since the Cavern Dweller is a monster, it's height 4. And since I'm nimble, I have 2 pivots, right? So the idea is I have a pretty nice flank charge that's within 20 inches here that I want to do with the dogs, because I could, in theory, get a pop, and that would be amazing. And secondly, it would make him, again, have to engage, and that's I just want to force it right now, because ogres are decently fast. I mean, they're no faster than elves. In fact, they're slower, but they still are decently fast, but they're not like cav fast. They're not 7+. So I do need to force engagements from opponents, especially ones that have better range utility than I do. So that's another little bit of a puzzle, and you can see this is how I do it. So this is how I do it, baby. So I take my siege breakers, run them into the forest, and then take one of my ASBs and put him right there. And the plan is the dogs that were right here have to basically wheel around, and then I end up like this to dodge my ASB. And then the rule for charging is that you wheel, the quickest path is the one with the fewest wheels. So I wheel the lowest amount with my nimble possible to hit this corner, and it doesn't hit the woods. So this is a non-hindered charge, so it's pretty nice there. The one on the left's a little easier. I just take these hunters, put them in front of the barrier, and then take my warlock and put them a little bit far behind, which makes it so this path is longer than this one. So yeah, those are the plans. And off on the left, again, not being pictured, all my boomers advance forward. I put there's basically a boomer sergeant and then one of my, what's it called? ASB with the diadem of dragonkind that are kind of like this, both facing towards the wood, with a boomer horde behind them. So the cavern dweller or the direfang cannot fit through the gap to fight the boomer horde, and then the other boomer horde can be charged by the fallen. But I'm thinking, well, maybe they can't one round me, right? But you know, again, the fallen are going to get something. I'd prefer them to be fighting on the left where my opponent's a little weaker, especially if my boomers do manage to kill something, which would be great. And we move forward onto the combats. Yep. So this one, I just need to do that one wound here. That die, man, I kind of thought that was wounds for a second there. I'm like, oh, he already has 4 on him, and I'm like, I haven't done anything. Yeah, that was just a placement die to see how far he could go. And here is the end of the round. Finally, you can see the left side of the board that I've been talking about. And yeah, there was a Direfang Chieftain or Direwolf Champion, whatever they're called. And I decided to just put all my fire into it and kill it. So I could have put my fire into any of the 3 targets here. And I was like, okay, well, the thing I want to kill the most is the Fallen, but it's also the least likely to die due to Magnilda being right here and getting that Inspire, and then the Higher Nerve, and then it also has Iron Resolve. While the Cavern Dweller and the Direfang Chieftain, I think, almost are identical, right? Like, they have similar damage outputs. The Direfang and the Lurker are the same toughness, and then they have the same nerve, I think. So instead I just go, well, I'll just remove the Inspire then. So that's what I do, and everything just hangs out. While in the middle you can see my wolves. Yeah, it was a bit of a... It wasn't likely that they were going to kill off that that Cavern Dweller. So they get in there, they do a couple wounds, but it's actually a little below average, I think. Just a little bit. I think I do 2 wounds, and I had 14 attacks on 4s and 4s, so just a little below, but still, it belows to get that. And lastly, yeah, these goblins just barely do the 1 wound that I wanted, so that's good. Oh, I forgot to mention this, which is my boomers actually took 6 wounds, and it's because these wolf raiders right here are technically in the flank, I want to say, for shooting, and so when they shoot into me, they're wounding me on 4s along with this King on Chimera on 6s, and they end up doing 6 wounds to me, which is kind of brutal, but still, nothing beyond what I thought. And I do make a small mistake here, but I'll talk about that during my opponent's turn. Oh, and I forgot to mention this. I did end up casting Aura of Heroism onto this ASB. Yeah, he's just a little lightning rod for Aura of Heroism, while also being a scoring unit, right? So it's pretty good. Actually, moving on to turn 3. So there's Garrett himself. So turn 3 for the Varangur. No. This is just the end shot of turn 2. Turn 3. Yep. Turn 3. So the Varangur, mostly just a picture of the middle of the board. Off on the right, the horse raiders that were right here where Garrett's hand is, they have moved into this height flat piece of terrain. I think it's because it's the only place where my chariots haven't zoned them, right? So it's the only place that's safe. While he does take the countercharge onto my wolves, looking for a quick kill there. It's pretty likely. And then lastly, the wolf raiders that were on this hill just decide to roll over here, getting again away from my chariots, making it so I have no shots, and taking some shots onto some pot shots onto my siege breakers. The King on Chimera, or the Chieftain on Chimera, is being very cagey this game, and this is exactly why I was a much bigger fan of the Elf Dragon than the Kin Dragon. I've heard a lot of people talk about how much they like the Kin Dragon over it, and I just don't get it. Now it might be a little better, there's definitely an argument to be made, but before, when it had, what was it, breath 15, breath 12, doesn't really matter, breath higher than 10, I love high breath attack on flying monsters, on flying combat monsters, because they can do stuff like this where they don't need to engage just yet. Like the Chieftain on Chimera should not be engaging anything that I've given him. at least at this point in time. So instead, he just flies around and gets the damage in anyway, so you're never wasting that potential, right? Like, you don't do that thing where you go, well, I guess my flyer backs up 5 and, you know, does whatever. So yeah, I much prefer this. The lightning bolt is nice because of that 24-inch range, but if you're playing with any sort of medium amounts of terrain, you know, it's just not as good. It's just not. But in my opinion, of course. So yeah, the King on Chimera moves over there to get a flank shot with its breath onto my siege breakers. It seems like a good plan. While the Rhino here, the Cavern Dweller, and the Bloodsworn go into my dogs. The Bloodsworn had a flank charge, so seems nice. But my hunters are ready to counter into whatever ends up over there. On the left, the Fallen and Magnilda. This is the the Fallen and Magnilda go into my, or Magnilda? I don't know how to pronounce her name. Anyway, go into my boomers, and I don't know, I just wasn't thinking that she had that many attacks. I played against her a few times, but I'm not a Varangur player, so sometimes I forget. And yeah, they're gonna shred those boomers. Once I saw how many dice she has, I was like, wow, that's bad. The Cavern Dweller, on the other hand, goes into, I think there's a picture of it, so just showing off the charges. Yeah, so Magnilda is right here behind my cannon, and then, yeah, this Fallen Horde, that's not going to be pretty. At least they don't have Pathfinder till 2019. So, yeah, the Cavern Dweller goes into one of my Boomer Sergeants, and I think this was a smart plan, mostly because my opponent had a choice of either overcommitting onto the Boomer Horde on the right, when he really doesn't need it, as Magnilda plus the Fallen should be able to do it, and if they can't, he doesn't want to be in that position. So instead, he has a choice of which of these two targets to go into, and I think my opponent was a little spooked about how much breath I had, like how much, yeah, most people are, anyway, how much piercing 1 breath I had between the double Boomer Horde and the double Boomer Sergeant, and he decides to just try to remove one of them, which I think was a good plan, but I think he went for the wrong target here. Since the Cavern Dweller is crushing 3, I think the better target would have been my ASB. Either way, he removes my ability to, get some ranged dice on him. But if he takes out the ASB, which they're the exact same stats to him, he'll remove my only inspiring source on this side of the table. And, maybe he just thought that the Boomer Sergeant had Inspire Boomers. Most people do think they have that. They don't. So, I don't know. Probably not what I would have gone for, knowing what I know about ogres. Anyway, here's the funny stuff, which is my opponent ends up putting 22 wounds onto these goblins, and of course he double ones it, because, that's just the way it goes. That's exactly what's going to happen. It was a little funny because I was sort of jabbing him a little bit about how unstoppable goblins are, because I love talking shit about that, and he goes and double ones it, and then I felt bad for about 2 seconds. And moving forward, you can see that this is the full end of round. On the right here, yep, built goblin tough. These goblins are merely wavered by this wolf on wolf violence, and the other goblins aren't even that due to the double one, due to the excellent rule of double ones. Thankfully, with all of his shooting, he only manages to put 3 more wounds onto my siege breakers, and given their rally to, actually it didn't matter how much rally I had, but he only puts 3 more wounds on me and doesn't manage a waver, which is great for the ogres. And on the left here, yeah, you can see things go okay. They don't go, in the median range, right? So he definitely deletes these boomers, right? And then overruns with Magnilda to stare down my Boomer Sergeant, while the or one of my Boomer Sergeants, while the Fallen tilt towards my boomers to take care of them. But the Cavern Dweller does not manage to kill off my Boomer Sergeant, and in fact doesn't even waver it. So a little unfortunate there, but that's just sort of what giant-esque units do. Sometimes, even with that 3+ to hit, they still have that variable number of attacks, and sometimes they don't get it done. In case you're wondering, right here, he does double one it, but thankfully, we measured this very carefully, obviously. He is just barely splitting this, so my my Yetis, or my hunters, will charge him in the front, because if that was a flank charge, that That might even be good game, because I'd have these guys, my boomer sergeants in range to charge as well, and then some goblins just for a little pip damage. And this is where all of his loot tokens are. So thankfully it's a front charge though. And we move on. Here's actually the series of mistakes I made. The first mistake I made, which is my Warlock should have cast Aura Heroism onto this Boomer Sergeant to protect my boomers. Especially as I thought he was going to go for this guy. That might be a long 6, but still. Thankfully, my opponent, when he rolls out, just destroys them with Fallen, so +2 would not have mattered, but I still think that would have been the better choice, especially as there's not a lot of shooting that can go into these siege breakers that isn't going to go into their front, and they have cover, so probably not going to do a whole lot. So the second mistake I made is that I forgot to drop the loot tokens with my siege breakers, and I say forget, but the second my opponent's turn started, I was like, oh man, I 100% should have dropped the loot tokens a little bit back here, right? And had, say, my Warlock pick them up, because I could just hide around this forest. My opponent is, we're finally getting into, or I'm able to fight his range game now, as my chariots are ready to pounce on this unit. This unit's a little bottlenecked, so yeah, probably would have been the better choice, but I did not do it. So turn 3 for the Ogres, finally getting into the fight with not goblins. And on the right, I decided to go into his, what are these guys? Wolf Raiders. I mean, technically they're Horse Raiders, but with some of my chariots. So these chariots at the bottom are finally not wavered. They move forward a little bit to gain cover from the guys that are in the height flat terrain over there, and to just help zone some of this stuff out a bit more, especially the Chieftain on Chimera, which I am very worried about. So that's the plan there. My goblins just back up. I decided to not go into his units with my siege breakers, mostly because I do want to drop my loot tokens here, and I want to stay in the forest for one more turn, since especially since I decided to not drop the loot tokens last turn. I'm going to hold them this turn as well, because I think if his King on Chimera goes in here, maybe, no, this is another mistake, because if the King goes into me, I'm already sitting on 9 wounds. Yeah, I definitely should have dropped him. Anyway, but that's my reasoning, is that I was like, well, if he shoots me for another turn, I only have 9 wounds on me, and I think I can absorb 1 more turn of shooting before I go down. So that's the plan. My double 1 goblins go back into the Cavern Lurker, because they are blocking the flank charge for these guys anyway, so might as well go into the one with the lower nerve and the one that I've already wounded. Now here's the thing on the left. My hunters, just barely. So I measured this out for my opponent. We get out the laser. Actually, this laser right here, I lost it this game. Very unfortunate. It's expensive, but yeah, I lost it, or I left it at the store and someone took it, which is unfortunate. But anyway, these Fallen right here, I'm just barely able to slice and see them, and then I'm just barely within 12 inches from my starting point, which was somewhere over here. So yeah, I have a flank charge onto Fallen. That's super bad for them, and I mean super great for me though. And I decide to also throw my boomers into the front of them, just to add insult to injury, or in this case just to add a little bit more damage. I was originally planning, when I thought that this would have a flank charge onto his Bloodsworn due to that double 1, I was like, well, I could also have the Boomer Sergeant go into the flank and the boomers in the front, and maybe I could deal with the Fallen that way. But once I saw this, I was like, yeah, that's what I was doing. And showing up the combats, these guys have taken 1 damage from some archer shooting them, and yeah, I think I should be able to drop them pretty easily, or drop the Horse Raiders. And right here, nah, that's whatever. Who cares? Although it is a close-up of my very shoddily painted Goblin Wolf Raiders. The other unit is the first unit of fantasy models I ever painted. Not these ones, but the other guys that are wavered across the forest. These guys were painted the day before the event, because I went, well, I guess I do want to play fully painted, so I just gave them a slap of paint. Same thing with all these chariots. So yeah, these are the first guys I ever painted, but in terms of fantasy. But yeah, I painted this guy and all the chariots, which is why there's just a weird blank base in the middle the night before. So yeah, it looks all right. It's presentable. Here, yeah, this is a beautiful charge with the boomers to the front. I'm very happy about it, although if I don't kill them, I'll be pretty sad about it, I think. And right here I get, because my Boomer Sergeant was not even wavered, I have a front charge, or a front counter charge from him, and then my ASB goes into the flank. They're looking to just slap around a couple more wounds. It's only 6 attacks on 4s, but you know, it's better than nothing. And here is the end of the round, starting on the left, just to show, you know, what I expect to happen, which is the hunters managed to kill off the fallen. That is a big load off my back. My Boomer Sergeant, I think, yeah, my Boomer Sergeant plus the Warlock, Boomer Sergeant plus this Warlock all shoot into Magnilda here, hoping to get rid of her. I do 3 wounds, which I think puts her on boxcars, but, you know, that doesn't happen. So yeah, just looking for a little luck there. While in the middle, my goblins that couldn't, they do double the wounds on this cavern dweller, but yeah, don't manage any magic, so he's still up. And then over here, my chariots do manage to kill off these doggos. And here's the thing about my after movement. There are dogs over here, or horse raiders over here, and they can currently see the flank of these chariots, but I'm not super worried about it, as they're sitting in rough terrain, meaning that they'll only hit me on a 5+ and they'll lose their Thunder 1, and then I have these chariots in the back ready to punish them for it. Now the thing I need to do is make sure that the King on Chimera can only charge me in the front along with these dogs. So I decided to back up with my linchpin unit, which is this Warlord on Chariot, and with this Regiment of Chariots. And unfortunately, the Regiment of Chariots just back up 1 while the Warlord backs up 2. It would have been perfect if they'd both backed up 1, 2, or 3, or the Chariots had, or if they'd all backed up at least 2. But I roll a 1, so it happens. And we move forward onto turn 4, but at least that gives my opponent a juicy flank as opposed to that possibly disastrous charge into my siege breakers. And we do turn 4, and yep, you can see that this is what my opponent does in fact take that chieftain charge onto the flank of my chariots, hoping to get rid of them real quick. The rest of his army just sort of backs around. My hunters had turned to face his Bloodsworn, so this is after his turn. My miraculous goblins did not get another double 1 and die. But yeah, so the Bloodsworn turn around to face off against my hunters. The Cavern Dweller turns to face off against my siege breakers. The dogs just run away, making sure that they are greater than 10 inches away. So yeah, seems like a good plan. And over on the left, the Cavern Dweller goes into... Does he go into the siege breaker? I think, yeah, so he goes into the siege breakers because I couldn't quite block that up with my charge due to the backup of a 1, and the Cavern Dweller plus Magnilda end up doing 7 wounds to my boomers, and unfortunately they waver them. That would have been really, really nice had they not wavered them, obviously, just because a horde of boomers is actually deadlier in combat than it is in shooting, and a countercharge, this force doesn't matter. So I think I could have killed off Magnilda, but you know, it happens. At least they're not dead. And we move on to turn 4 for the... Oh, no. I'm not sure what this is showing. But anyway, turn 4 for the Ogres. Yeah, oh, no. We should... I hadn't taken a picture of the Chieftain combat yet, so yeah. The Chieftain just obliterates these chariots. And unfortunately, these little friggin' horse archers fire their piddly little bows into my chariots, who are already sitting on 10 wounds, and managed to take them off, so no punish. And turn 4 for the Ogres. It's an interesting one. So let's talk about the left first. So I decided to take my Boomer Sergeant and ASB again into the Cavern Lurker, this time both of them getting a flank charge, but they're both hindered due to no countercharge. I decided to back my boomers up a little bit, I want to say. And I could have done a thing where I had these boomers, I back them up, they're full 3, and then I put one of the Boomer Sergeants in the way, or that Boomer Sergeant in the way of this Cavern Dweller as it doesn't have Nimble. And then my ASB just charges it in the flank again. So I could have trapped it, but I decide Magnilda can probably drop them on her own at this point. So I don't know. This was almost certainly the wrong decision. But I think I just got, I saw red, got greedy, and went for the kill on the Cavern Dweller rather than the safe play. So anyway, do that. In the middle, I do take my hunters to the front and a Boomer Sergeant to the flank of this guy. I don't know if I can drop them. I mean, I think they're 22, 24, and I have 18 attacks on 3s and 3s, and then 8 attacks on 4s and 4s. So and with Brutal, it's, it could happen. It's not the most unlikely, but it would be really nice if it did happen. One of the things I do is is take the loot tokens. I finally dropped them with my siege breakers at the start of my turn. And so this was rule question number 1 about loot tokens. How many can you drop? You can, in fact, drop all of them if you want. So I drop all the loot tokens, and then my Warlock moves on top of them and picks them up. So I have all the loot tokens there. The Warlock is slightly more forward. I think this picture is just taken before I'd adjusted his move. So, because I end up with the central loot token as well. The Siege Breakers go into the Cavern Dweller, hoping to one-round it. It's sitting on 4 wounds already, so that's not that unlikely. And if I one-round them, I can either turn towards the Bloodsworn, maybe, but that will only happen if I sent one of my ASBs with the Blade of Slashing into his Chimera. I am hindered for charging through this forest, but if I can ground that Chimera and turn off its shooting, I will definitely face the Siege Breakers, assuming I kill this Cavern Dweller, towards the Bloodsworn to deal with them, because this guy will be... Yeah, he'll be unable... Yeah, I won't turn, I'll just go forward, because if I go even 1 inch forward, I'll be out of this guy's line of sight. So I might even be out of it right now. So that's the plan there. My Rhino guy just decides to mess around with these dogs, goes in for a real quick stab, just hoping to get a waiver. This is again this is a very greedy turn. So on the left, I didn't block these boomers from being charged, and on the right, I decided to try to turn off a bit more shooting with the Horse Raiders instead of just doubling onto this Chimera. But go big or go home, I guess. And here is the end of the round. You can see sort of what happens. My Warlock goes for an Aura of Heroism onto this Boomer Sergeant. I think that that's a great idea, mostly because these hunters are not inspired, so necessary at least. Starting on the right, first off, this ASB doesn't even shut down the King on Chimera, so I mean, it's unlikely that he does, or it's not likely that he does. It's not the greatest odds on 4s and 4s, even with a reroll. So I don't shut it down. My Chariot, I don't think I waiver these Horse Raiders, although I do a couple points of damage, so I turn off their bows, which means that my Siege Breakers need to turn back towards the King on Chimera after they finish off that Cavern Dweller, which thankfully they did that. And yeah, in this combat, I don't do poorly, but I don't do well. I only do 11 wounds to the Bloodsworn. Now, on average, let's see here. Yeah, I guess it's not that bad, right? So like on average, I've got like 12 and then 9 wounds from the hunters and then like 2 wounds from this guy. So this is the exact average, I believe. But I don't swing it one way or the other. So yeah, that happens. And over here, on the left, nothing happens with this Cavern Dweller. I don't manage to waiver it, so unfortunate. And we move on to turn 5 for the Varangur, and now we start playing Ring Around the Forest a little bit. So the King on Chimera just flies around to do a breath attack onto my Warlock, who is sitting on all the tokens. Oh no! He flies around. He doesn't do a breath attack. I mean, he's gonna breathe on the Siege Breakers, but not onto my Warlock, because Magnilda finally pops her wings I guess drinks a Red Bull, and goes into the side of my Warlock. The only saving grace here is that I put my side right on this wall, so when she lands, she ends up with a hindered charge. So, you know, small miracles. These dogs, which I've done nothing to this whole game, move forward to also get a flank shot onto my siege breakers, and I just feel like when I placed this unit, I could have done a better job. I probably should have got the laser out and split exactly where the leader point for these dogs were, but I didn't do that. So I'm gonna get flank shot a lot by a lot of bows here. These dogs go into this ASB after, you know, they can just, they're right here, and during a charge, they just nimble that way and then go over here. They're all nimbly bimbly. And lastly, the Bloodsworn go into my Hunters. Hopefully they don't one-round them, although they definitely have the capacity to do so. So, hoping that they don't do it, though. And we move forward to, oh yeah, and then the Rhino goes back into my Boomers, especially now that MacLeod has left. Someone needs to finish him. Yep, showing off all the combats. And here we go again. My opponent does a couple wounds, does 2 wounds to my siege breakers, and another superfluous double ones. Ah, yeah, feels good. At least he didn't actually need, you know, anything but in this case, but still funny to me. And yeah, there's a picture of the turn 5 die, very timely. And here is the end of turn 5 for the Varangur. No, there's no way he's done this combat yet. But anyway, the important ones are done, which is in his shooting, he doesn't manage to do anything to the siege breakers. They're still operational, and I believe within 10 inches of these doggos. The Warlock is not only not killed at that 5 wounds, it's still a lot of wounds. I think she has, what, 8 attacks on 4s and 2s, and did 5 wounds to me. That's a lot. But at least doesn't even waver me, so I'm still ready to go. And these guys do in fact one-round my Hunters, and I'm like, well, fuck. So that's unfortunate, but it's also not that unlikely. I think the Bloodsworn have 25 attacks on 3s due to their sharpness, and then also crushing 1. So they're hitting me on 4s due to ensnare, and then wounding me on 3s. Not the worst odds, not the best odds, but still, it's only 1 roll. And manages to do it. And lastly, the cavern dweller, I really want to say cave dweller, ends up taking out my Boomers. So things are looking a bit more dicey. The Varangur is definitely still in it, even though I currently have, well, I only have 4 tokens. He has 3. It's not that bad. And we move on to turn 5 for the Ogres, and it looks like this. So here is a loot problem number 2 that we did, but we do end up doing this one wrong, unfortunately, because the only question that we end up asking is how many loot tokens. It's not how many can you drop, it's whether you can put them in a stack, right? And I'm like, well, they're tokens, why wouldn't you be able to put them in a stack? And it's super important that we know the answer to that. You can, by the way, put them in a stack. But the thing we didn't ask was, when can you drop the loot tokens? Because I move over here with the Warlock, then drop the loot tokens, which is not the way it works. You have to drop the loot tokens at the beginning of your movement. Even though you can pick them up at the end of any phase where you're in base-to-base contact with them, you cannot drop them at the end of any phase. So yeah, bit of a kerfuffle there, but both of us, neither of us even thought to ask that, so I don't feel too bad. So yeah, I decide to drop the loot tokens again. I drop them all with my Warlock, who's taken 5 wounds, and drop them for my Warlord here to pick them up. I am currently hidden from his King on Chimera, from these dogs. Well, no, not from the dogs. The Siege Breakers are giving me cover from the dogs. But yeah, my ASB took 0 wounds from those dogs, so I guess we did do that fight, and goes back into them, hoping to turn off their bows, because it's the only important thing. And the Siege Breakers just back out of the woods, it looks like, to dodge any shooting, well, to dodge any charging. So that's the plan. I decide to just go, screw this Cavern Dweller, it doesn't matter. And I put one of my Boomer Sergeants in front of it to block its ability to to charge around. Well, no, I don't do it to block a charge. I do it because I need these guys dead. The Bloodsworn have to go right now because they are staring. I couldn't move in a way where I drop the loot tokens in base contact with me and then pick up the loot tokens because they had to be base to base, meaning that there can only be 25 millimeters between my Warlord and the Warlock, and it's physically impossible for me to be out of the charge arc. So I move all the shooting I can over there and get ready to just boom these guys away, hopefully. And yeah, showing up the one combat, these guys do have 4 wounds on them so far from the Warlord on Chariot. The ASB has done nothing, but I could, it's not that bad of a go. I've got 3 attacks on, it's 3s and 3s with 1 reroll, and I have Brutal, so I could pretty easily kill them or even waver them. I guess the other way. But I put 2 more wounds on them, and this time I get the superfluous double ones, so pretty funny. At least to me. And here is the end of the round. Thankfully, yeah, this shooting goes well, very well actually. I think I do a further 6 or 7 wounds onto the Bloodsworn and manage to kill them off. They drop their tokens right here, and this is what the bottom of 5 looks like. Let's see what the top of 6 is. So top of 6, yeah, my opponent is still, definitely still in it, so doing everything he can. And decides to take Magnilda and go into the front of my Warlord on Chariot. I do have 1 wound on me, but anyway, the rest of his army, this is actually after his turn. So, oh, that's how I got a wound. Yeah, Magnilda charges me, but she charges over this this wall because she'd already used flight, and does 1 wound to me, but does not boxcar it to get the waiver. Everything else just shoots into my Warlock to remove another target. And then the Cavern Dweller charges into one of my Boomer Sergeants and kills that off, I believe. And here is Ogre turn 6. Yeah, the Cavern Dweller definitely did that. The Ogres have abandoned the Cavern Dweller. They want nothing to do with it. I think it only has a 6-inch or a 12-inch charge, so we're running off. I decide my Boomer Sergeant here can move and shoot without too much of a problem, but I need someone to pick up these tokens as a lot of stuff is staring me down, and if we end up with a turn 7, I don't want to be sitting here where only my Warlord has the tokens and I've just left 3 in the open. So instead, I just run my ASB over, grab them, and then nimble to face towards the Chimera in case it charges me. So I could have gone for a charge here onto Magnilda, and maybe I should have, as she's sitting on 3 wounds, but in the end I decided to not, because if I fail to kill her, I can't get out of line of sight of the King on Chimera, and he will murder me if there's a turn 7. In retrospect, I definitely think I should have charged her to turn off 1 more target, because yeah, I've got 7 attacks on 3s and 3s, I want to say. She's def 5, so 7 attacks, 3s and 3s, and then I hit Brutal. It's not the best odds, but it's okay. I do take my Boomer Sergeant and try to kill off these dogs finally, but unfortunately I don't hit them as I'm giving them the most cover. So yeah, nothing happens there, and we roll up to see if there's a turn 7, and there is. So here's turn 7. Things are getting very bad. So the Ogres coming at it from a dominant position, but the Varangur might get something back from the double ones that they rolled, and a tactical mistake on the left that left their fallen dead, but they still might snatch victory from the jaws of Ogres. Getting these charges, Magnilda plus 2 dogs right in the flank. 1 dog is hindered due to charging into the train, but that's not that big of a deal. And lastly, the King on Chimera goes into my other loot tokens on an ASB with, so that guy has 15 attacks with elite on 3s to hit, 2s to wound, no Brutal at least, but I'm only an 11-13 with a reroll. I guess technically this guy's still up, so assuming he doesn't kill off that Rhino, that Warlord on Chariot, I will be a 13-15, but that's not great either. And we rolled up, and here it is. Yeah, he does. No. This is just showing off this. Yep, showing off the combats, and bam! It's embarrassing, and it's just, I felt so bad at the end of this. Like, these dice were so bad. So you might notice this is the total wounds on this warlord. So he charges me in the flank with, I think the horse riders have 16 attacks each. So he is going 32 attacks with 4s and 4s, and then 32 attacks on 5s and 5s, right? With a further 7 or 8 attacks on 3s and 3s. And he does 3 total wounds. Total. Ugh, it's just terrible. There's not even a roll where I disappear. Even if he had boxcars gets me to waver due to this being a 2018 list and me being a 1618 because of it. So yeah, only doesn't even get that waiver, by the way. And then right here, the King on Chimera goes like, well, I see your many dice failure and I raise you this failure. So he does a little bit better, nabbing 5 wounds on me, but doesn't even manage to waiver the ASB either. And it's just a, I mean, it's just a shit show. And oops. So that is the last picture I have of the game. I do end up charging, I believe. What do I do here? I think I end up charging with the ASB charges into the King on Chimera just because I can, and I think I decide to take the charge with my Warlord on Chariot into these guys, along with the Boomer Sergeant, because I'm just looking for a bit of attrition points. But yeah, nothing happens. I don't manage to waver or kill any of these units, and that's the end of the game. So with Blackjack scoring, I have 7 loot tokens all over the middle line, all in my enemy's territory, meaning I get 14 VP to 0. After we count up attrition, I think my opponent gets a pretty good attrition score because I didn't kill his most expensive stuff. But and almost everything of mine is gone. We're down to 3 ogre characters, but we are showing off how powerful ogre characters really are. That, you know, the fact that they can pick up loot tokens, it's just really good, and they're very tough. So yeah, it ends up being a pretty good victory, which leaves me the first time I've gone to a Kings of War tournament and ended day 1 undefeated. I do have a tie, but I am still undefeated, which is a welcome feeling, just because, you know, it's nice to win, and we will see what happens tomorrow with more hard-fought games. But until then, bye.